And every farmer knows the frustration of doing everything by the book. The right seeds, the standard NPK, the latest chemistry, only to watch input costs climb while soil resilience disappears. We've been taught to treat the soil like a sterile medium that just needs the right injections to perform. But what if we're looking at it all wrong? What if the soil isn't a factory, but a massive living digestive system?
And how I got into organic was I was doing a trial with methionine and choline on dairy cows, and the butterfat dropped, and we were having troubles with not enough effective fibers. So I started feeding them pineapple byproducts in Hawaii. And well, they started to abort, and we had all kinds of problems. The pineapple was laced with insecticides, and then it affected the cows. And that's how I got to be organic. I said, wow. Everybody said, well, humans aren't eating that much. I said, yeah, but the cows are starting to abort, and reproduction went downhill, and insecticides accumulated in the fats and in the milk. And so I dropped out. I was going to be a professor, and I dropped out and said, I gotta go back and get some common sense in this game.
It's really about moving past the NPK mentality. This whole, show that we're putting on for the audience and talking to people about, and to really understand the synergy between the minerals, the soil life, and plant health. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's what a lot of these conventional farmers are missing today. They're spending a lot of money on NP and K and a lot of synthetic and conventional, synthetic sprays and inputs, but they're missing the boat. The life of the soil, the minerals of the soil, and then the health of the plants. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And see, that was why years ago, like the fertilizers that were sold, like NPK numbers like 3-12-12 is what my grandfather got. Then my dad got a 6-24-24. Now they sell a 9-23-30. So the solubility went up. And they could then sell it based on solubility, but never performance. And there were salts and ammonias, and the idea was to saturate the ground. But then they kept saying, well, we got to put on what the crop takes off. I said, yeah, but it takes off 20 plus minerals. Why are we just doing 3? And then the other thing, we totally ignored this nutrient use efficiency. Are those nutrients really getting into the plant? There was a biological link and a soil structure link that got missed. And that's why when I started Midwestern BioAg, we called it biological farming because I wanted the farmers to focus on the biology. Because on dairy farms, that's really what made them click. The forages they grew and having the manure from cows and the mineral balance we put out there to get quality forages was really about nutrient exchange and mineral uptake.
And it's all detriment of the soil to soil health and then to crop life at the end of the day, to crop health as well.
Yeah, and that's why nutrients. Yeah, nutrients usually, you see, if you look at nature, nutrients don't come out of the sky in mineral form. They're hooked into a plant. They're hooked into carbon. So every year I learn more. So now I'm working with a composting operation, and we're trying to get minerals in compost. I want my minerals in a carbon biological cycle, whether that's coming through cover crops, whether that's coming through the fertilizers we add to make sure we add whether humates or some kind of carbon with that fertilizer. And so I want to get that nutrient exchange up. See, the regenerative right now is really focusing on trying to get more efficient. But how are they going to get more efficient without focusing on biology? And the other thing is that they want to drop their insecticides, fungicides, or pesticides. Well, what did they earn the right to do that? I use that phrase all the time. Have you earned the right to cut your nitrogen? Have you earned the right to make a change? And what's that going to take? It's going to take a soil health and a soil life and getting those minerals in a more exchangeable form through carbon biology.
Can you explain to us about your transition from a traditional dairy farming and nutrition idea to realizing the soil was the missing link?
Well, one thing, it was very easy for me to grasp soils because dairy cows are a very similar system to soils. They're a biological system. We call it feed to cows. We call it residues and cover crops to the soil. So they're both biological systems. And so having studied dairy cows, it was really easy to say that the biology was in the cow's rumen. We had to feed the rumen, and we started back in the old days, we were just feeding hay and cob corn and a little soybean meal. Well, now all of a sudden there's 6 or 7 commodities, and we're adding a lot more minerals, and we're adding biological to it, and we're making sure the quality is highly digestible. And all the things we've done to the cow is exactly the same things we need to do to soil. And see, the dairy people really kind of understood that about, because it was a living live system that the dairy cow was. And so that was what brought about some of those principles. And, over the years, I think we mentioned, the first thing came along back in the 70s was sustainable ag. Well, that really didn't mean anything. It just meant they didn't want to buy any fertilizer, but it didn't survive because it never fixed the soil. Now, regenerative is really about, they want to regenerate. I said, the only thing I like about that word is they were recognizing it's broken. And why would you have to fix it if everything was going so great? But you're going to have to use biological principles to do that. And regenerative, to me, organic is clean air, clean water, clean food. Regenerative is really a lot of talk about no-till and cover crops is good and compost is good, and having livestock, you know as well as I do, everybody's not going to have livestock. Drive
Yeah, that's
across the
right.
Midwest and tell me how many farms are going to put fences back in again. Not very many of them. So we can still do this. We got soil livestock, so it's taking care of that soil life and understanding it, how it's fed, and you got to have air and water. It's got to be fed, and what you got to do to get the biology to take over your farm.
Absolutely. And you say that quite often. You said it's it's very similar to the cow's stomach, right? The
Yes.
rumen, like the soil is very, very close, right? Explain a little bit about that if you would.
Yeah, and so now what's in the dairy world, see, and years ago, we used to go after super quality forages and try to get the cow to produce as much milk as we could by what we grew and how well we did at feeding it and growing it. Well, now, see, you can push the soil by putting on more nitrogen and more chemicals. You can push it into getting a higher crop. You can push the cow by feeding her hotter feeds. And of course, the cow doesn't last very long. Same kind of thing. She falls apart just like your soils would fall apart. But if you grow super quality forages and you feed them properly, that cow, what's her ability to give milk without having to push all kinds of drugs and chemicals and more hot feeds into the cow and things that are against her long-term survival? Now in the soil, see, that's why I want to have my nutrients in a timed release sustainable form. And so the one word that crop farmers need to take for my whole dairy thing is we added the word digestibility. So if you're going to grow a cover crop or do something, how fast does it break down? How fast do you want it release nutrients? You want to feed it to bacteria? You don't want to feed it to fungal populations? To understand that relationship, that the crop needs to be fed. And so you got to make sure you're feeding it like you do your cow every day by having digestibility of the nutrients show up at the right time.
That's right. And that's in the cattle and that's in your soil. You
That's in
have
the
to
soil,
have
yeah.
you have to have the proper digestion or the crops never get it.
Yep.
It'll sit there, but what's
Yep.
biologically or what's bioavailable to the plant versus what's
That's right.
loaded in there, waiting to be mined or waiting to be cycled into plant usable forms. So
That's why people jump on certain topics, like they say, oh, we got to be more fungal dominated. Well, the soil life eats first. And so the more complex food I put in the soil, they're eating it first and your crop is starving. You got to have a balance between bacteria. You have to have some highly soluble stuff, that's bacteria food, and some slow release, that's fungal food. And we thought all those years, adding complex carbons to our soil to feed the fungal population would build organic matter. And now the new thinking is it's photosynthesis, it's liquid carbon, and that dumping that into the soil and letting the bacteria and the fungal do their thing and make the organic matter, make the complex carbons by putting more sugars and more photosynthized materials in the soil.
which makes complete sense because as you grow larger and larger populations of biology, what happens? Naturally, those things happen in the soil. Right? It's not the guidance. So we talk about organic and regenerative, right? Many people use organic and regenerative interchangeably. You prefer biological, as we know.
Yes.
Will you define why biological is the most accurate term for this system?
See, because of the fact that biology is the only one that's got rules. Regenerative, I say, I'm afraid it's going to get really watered down by people using it to sell something. But regenerative, it doesn't mean clean air, clean water, clean food. It means that there's some positive steps involved with it. But see, I think the rules on regenerative from California are really good because they address the chemical, physical, and biological. And you got to make sure you're getting your soil health going and all these kind of things. But most people don't really understand that. But biological, in the 1990s, I laid out 6 rules to biological farming. And they deal with the chemical, physical, and biological. If you lay those out on a piece of paper and say, how am I addressing all these 6 rules? You'll have really changed your soil. And see, that's what's missing with regenerative. It's just people are just using that word to sell something or it doesn't have much meaning. And now they may want to cut down on their fertilizers. And there's nothing wrong with growing cover crops and putting out compost, but there's also minerals involved. And so they sometimes ignore the minerals. I said, well, minerals are certainly a big part of this thing. And sometimes, like calcium is king of the whole show. You can't not do minerals and expect your soil to get healthy.
Yeah. And when you're talking minerals, are you talking just, calcium, certain things like that? Or are you talking like broad spectrum trace minerals as well? Like all of the finite minerals or elements that we see, a lot of them on, say, like the periodic table of elements, right?
Yes.
That's really what brings nutrition to food, correct?
I think that's where the real change in agriculture is going to take place when we do this. I got a podcast tomorrow talking about nutrient density with a test lab in Texas, and I met them at the Commodity Classic also. But I think the whole thing is that's right. So first of all, it's more than NP and K. So I always say calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and our major trace minerals, zinc, iron, manganese, copper, boron. But then what about the rare earth minerals? What about the other ones on that periodic chart? And that's the reason why I like using kelp. There's certain deposits of minerals on this planet that are highly, there could be ditamine from California. There could be, years ago, I had planters too from Colorado. There's azamites, there's fluorostem. There's some of these deposits that are really high in some of those rare earth minerals in it. And so I preferred to always use kelp, because now I got something from the ocean and I'm putting on minerals that you normally wouldn't try. They're small, really small amounts, but I think they had a place. And that's the other reason why I like using more natural mined materials to correct my soil. I'm not going to use commercial fertilizer to bring up my phosphorus level in my soil. I might use manure, but I also want to use rock phosphate. Now that's comes out of a deposit that's got other things in it besides the calcium and the phosphorus.
Absolutely. And again, just feeding the soil microbes to allow them to then be able to unlock more phosphorus for the plant usage.
Yes.
That's really what it comes down to. And you did mention that your framework, you just mentioned it, is the famous for the 6 steps to biological farming. Can you briefly touch on the philosophy behind them?
So first of all, I don't want to throw out the science part of it. So I want to see a soil test. And I like the soil tests that have been around for 75 years. Yes, they got flaws. People try to make a religion out of soil testing or other things. I need that to give me guidelines to say, from that test, what do I find really short? I want to look at several things on a soil test. What kind of soil is this? I need to look at the organic matter, the CEC, and the pH. I need to look at the P's and the K's. I want to look at calcium, magnesium. I want to look at trace minerals. So where are those on a soil test? So I want to start out with a soil test, but I separate out soil correction from crop fertilizer. So most soils need some kind of correction. Say it might need, phosphorus might be low. I just was at a farm yesterday in Michigan that some of the soils were really low on calcium, really high in calcium, but really low on phosphorus and potassium, and the pHs are really high. So I want to know what I'm working with. I got to see my base to work with. So if I separate out soil corrections, fixing what's broken, and then the crop fertilizer is dishing out minerals above and beyond what my soil has capability to do. See, on our farm, we don't do the crop fertilizer. We do the cover crops and put compost out there, which I guess would be in the crop fertilizer. But I want my soil to do the work. Could we get more yield by pushing it, by putting on more nitrogen, other things where we're organic? And we just choose not to. We grow a really healthy crop. We get really good yields. But I want to make, so my soils, we've corrected those soils in the last 30 years. We've been on that organic farm for 30 years. You take a soil test, there's not any minerals that need to be added. So now we got to I got to get those in that carbon biological soil and get them released. So the first thing is about the minerals and testing minerals. I say on fertilizers, I want to make sure I'm balancing the soluble to slow release. I don't want it all to be water soluble. I want to make sure that they're not harsh on my soil life. I'd rather have the pH of my fertilizer low, not my soil. I want to get nutrients. There's all kinds of things I looked at with fertilizer. And then the second thing would have been really about reducing some of the negatives, like insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, nitrogen, and biotechnology, whatever list you want to put as what's negative that I'm putting on my soil. That's tillage, but it could be in that category too, of course. And so then I look at tillage. I'm a real believer in shallow incorporating residues and running deep rippers. See, the fence post rots off up here. See, the no-till guy taught us you can't plow, dig, and disc every year. Way back when I was a kid, that's what they did. But then that had some limitations. Nutrient stratification, paction, there's all kinds of issues showed up with no-till. For no-till to really be successful, I tell them, if you're not growing cover crops, you're going to fail at no-till on most farms. Now, there's some successful guys, but you better have cover crops along with no-till. And I think some of the guys are starting to wake up to that effect. But strip-till came along, and it was like putting a flower pot on every plant. So strip-till said putting a flower pot on every plant was that don't tear middle zone. I can do anything I want to the top couple inches, but leave that middle zone. Once you fill that middle zone with roots and earthworm channels, leave that alone so the next crop can follow those channels and do anything you want to the top couple inches. But your soil's got to drain. It can't be waterlogged. So then that's where tillage would come in, shallow incorporating and run big rippers if necessary. Now we grow sweet grower and deep tap-rooted plants, so we aren't running the rippers anymore. We're doing everything we can to minimize the soil disturbance, if you want to call it. But I am a real believer in shallow incorporating residues. Anything you lay on top, let's say you're going to spray it stays on top. Well, that's like putting the feed for your cows on the other side of the fence. How the bugs in the soil are going to get to eat it. So yes, I can't have a crust on the soil. If you look at the rules of soil health, there's some really pretty powerful statements in there. Water infiltration is necessary. You can't have a crust on your soil, having living plants in the soil all the time. Now, they don't deal with minerals on that soil health thing, but that's beside the point. They still are important. And so there's all kinds of things to really look at my rules. And then the last one was feeding the soil life, whether that be with cover crops or compost or some way to feed what lives in there and create their ideal home first and then feed them.
Absolutely. And there it is. There's the 6 pillars. And that will build healthy soil.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you always get excuses. Oh, we don't get much rain here and all that. But, resilience is the ability to have, as we grow more organic, has the ability to hold more moisture in our soils. We work with guys that are in low moisture areas that have had a lot of success by building soils. So, leaving soil lay summer fallow and keep tilling it all the time, I say it's really a dumb idea. I don't know how that's supposed to work. See, but Jill Clapper, who's really quite involved with this, she's on the out west there, and she always said that major crops are grown after major kill-offs. So that's why moldboard plowing is hard to beat. You killed everything that's in the soil. It releases all its nutrients. You get a good crop, but your future doesn't look very good. Yes, it does.
I mean, we're talking, are we going to be able to work up the soils? Are we going to be able to do this? Are we going to be able to do that? None of them are not very often are they covered, right? Not very often do they have they have no more organic matter. They can't hold moisture anymore. So the little bit that we get out here, we get about 12 inches of annual precipitation total a year. We're in a high desert, but we have irrigation.
You better get that in the ground and you better hold it. See, and that's why all this rain, all the erosion, all this moisture that did fall, all the snow melts, all running down into the ocean somewhere. So we got to be able to hang on to what we have. And that's why soil structure is really important. It needs to look like a chocolate cake. Water's got to soak in.
Absolutely.
Of all the testing that goes on out here, I did that Exodus, John Lundgren, the 1,000 Farm Challenge. We signed up for that. And and they did a Regen Lab, did the testing, but water infiltration is huge. And it was really quite noticeable on our farm. And they measured several parameters. They were the first time I ever did a complete soil test. I really recognized what I see on my farm. Now it's beyond just the minerals. And now we're looking about water infiltration and carbon to nitrogen ratios and the stuff that they really measured out there. But the resilience that we built up in our soils was noticeable on those tests.
It's great that you've been able to accomplish that. You wanted to put your money where your mouth was, right? Years ago, you did it. And now, so many years later, you look how many years later it is, 40 years later, whatever that looks like, and it still proves to be true. And that's the exciting part. That really is. Chemistry meets biology. You often call calcium the king of minerals. Will you explain why calcium balance is the prerequisite for biological activity?
Calcium is one of those things that just because your pH is right, you don't get enough calcium. What really started that was in the drought in 1976, now and before you were born. And there was a major drought in the Midwest, and so people were buying Western hay. And the farmer kept saying, this stuff feeds different. What's different about it? And then we started testing it, and they had a higher level of calcium. See, it's drier land farming out there. It's not all washed out just because your pH was right. So then I realized that if you study calcium, I did studies where we put on soluble calcium, and all other minerals went up. That's why I started calling calcium the trucker of all minerals and boron the steering wheel, because boron is essentially the link to that calcium to get it work. So I'm one of those guys that I'm not so, I would say that put on tons of lime to raise your pH. I'm more interested in putting on smaller amounts every year and spoon feeding a soluble calcium source, because that really drives my biology and improves the soil structure. People know that under heavy soils, putting gypsum on opens up that soil, and that's a calcium and sulfur thing. So calcium's got a big role on making soils healthy and function, and it does for the biology out here, and it buffers out some of the things in the soil. So that's why I always want to start balance the soil with calcium and phosphorus. See,
Gotcha.
I spend half of my life in battles with things. Oh, God, your tillage is destroying soil. Now people are finally backing off of that. See, the organic guys are building more organic matter than the conventional guys with no-till, because we're actually, even though we do some tillage, there's negatives, we also do a lot of positives. And so we got this whole thing about, tillage was one of the battles. Phosphorus being the bad guy. Phosphorus is the good guy. The only reason phosphorus leaves the farm is called erosion. If I have a high level of phosphorus in my soil and it doesn't leave my farm, it's really phosphorus is the energy. It's the adenosine triphosphate. It's the energy cycle. I need phosphorus to get sugar levels up my plant. So I'm a real believer in having a good reserve in my soil that I can tap into with my cover crops and with my biology. So I got to have a base laid down. And that's why Regenerative is always talking about you got plenty of minerals in your soil. Well, how are you going to tap into them? And you got to have enough of it that's exchangeable. And that's why I say, I think I always start balancing all the calcium and phosphorus, and then I can spoon feed some of the other things. But that's how I start correcting the soils on most operations.
Oh man, that's great. Yeah. And you know what? And even out here where we're at, we do use also gypsum. We have high salts, we have tight soils. Like there's reasons why we utilize it. And so to help out in this area, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's calcium, it's sulfur, it's those things that are loosening up the soils, and it starts to allow some aggregation, things like that within the soil to allow life, oxygen in the soils, things like that we need.
Filling flats out here, I just want to on that. Well, I had a lot of success by putting on gypsum like you did, but we also then put on rock phosphate, and all of a sudden, nothing but weird grasses would grow, whether they be. The guy wouldn't get much production off of putting gypsum on rock phosphate. Really changed those spots.
That's interesting. Yeah, we'll have to keep that in mind. Always learning. They're always learning. Can you explain a little bit now why focusing solely on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK, leads to lazy plants and dead soil?
Yeah, and I think that what it amounts to is that you're almost hydroponic farming at that level. See, the plant determines the soil life. It took me 25 years to learn that. You think that, well, I'm going to try to get different soil life in it. No, the plant feeds the soil life based on what it wants. So then if I got plenty of phosphorus out there, well, it's not going to feed the mycorrhizae. If I got plenty of nitrogen out there, it's not going to help my rhizobium or my nodules on my plants. And the other thing, there's salts and ammonias. And so you can grow a big pile. You got to give the genetic people a lot of credit. They can dump on all kinds of salts and ammonias. And you look at some of these fields, the ground is as hard as concrete, and there's all these salts and ammonias, but they still get a corn crop. And that's the one I say. They bred that stuff to tolerate the silly stuff that farmers do instead of
Yeah.
saying, how do I get this to work without those things? So to me, it's, of course, then by using just NP and K and pushing the yields, now I got insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, problems out here. And so then a lot of farmers don't believe that if that soil is really working well, I don't need a fungicide. I don't need an insecticide. I don't need now. There might be rare areas and rare cases. Somebody talks about armyworms or cutworms or something. Now, we don't seem to have those on how we farm here in the Midwest. I'm not saying farmers should, but to get rid of those costs is really what is the first step. You see, the biggest struggle farmers have is that they start on this path of biological farming. They don't know when to drop their fungicides, their insecticides, their nitrogen levels, or their biotechnology. At what point can I drop those? And you're going to have to do some on-farm experiments.
Absolutely. And I like that, because that's exactly the way that we help. Whenever we're integrating biological inoculants into systems, things like that, we tell the farmers it comes to a certain point in time where you don't need for us to continuously to put in inputs to make the soils better. Now we just start feeding what's there, and we start reducing what we're selling to you. And most people look at us like we're crazy, Gary. You know what I mean? They're like, well, that's a pretty, that's not a very sustainable business model. You guys are going to be broke in not too long. But the reality is we're just helping the farmers and reducing their input costs and helping them move away from those things that are just costing their farm money. And I don't want them to just switch it over and give us the money. What I want them to do is to move all the way away from it. And I feel like when we can accomplish that with a farm, that's when we've won. It's a win for the farmer. It's a win for our company. And I feel like we've contributed back and helped,
And that was always our objective too, was to get them to reduce the amount of fertilizer they're putting on by doing a better job of management of their soil. See, I always said that out here, what you're talking about is predict your success. So if I say, does that product really fit me? If I put that on, what am I expecting from that? So you got to find your limiting factors, your constraints, and then you got to predict your success. And that's why I said the word regenerative is kind of nice. That means they recognize it's broken, but now what are you going to fix? Where do you start with fixing? Usually it's biology and soil structure and some minerals out here. But you're absolutely right. Companies come to our farm, right, with 1 year sowability or 1 year crop. They want to put a biological out on my farm. Ohio State developed a product. These guys were so sure it was going to produce all the nitrogen. Well, my cover crops produce 400 units of nitrogen a year. I don't need more nitrogen. I did their trial, zero response. I was trying to tell them you're on the wrong farm. Go to someone that needs your stuff. Don't go to I don't need your stuff anymore. And that's the same thing you're kind of seeing.
Yeah, and it's great, and it's a good feeling when you can help a farmer or a producer or a ranch, whatever it is, move away from all the inputs. And and the way I've always looked at it is you're starting to put money back in the proper pockets, which is the families, the producers, the people that are out there, working the soil, working their farm, growing the crops, doing those things. Those are the people that deserve the money. It's not all these other companies, including ours. We're happy to help people get there, but that's when you win, I feel like.
So that's part of the structures we have, the troubles we have. We got all these fertilizer companies scattered around. They make money selling fertilizer and chemicals. So for them, they're locked in a little territory. See, I in business all over the Midwest. So I didn't mind having farmers I used to work with use less, because then they'd tell their neighbors and I'd get more customers. But I didn't depend upon the farmer. I didn't depend upon the farmer buying tons and tons of stuff for me to make my living. I could go to a new farm to say, look what we did over here. Why don't you do the same kind of a thing? And that's part of the struggles we have, because the fertilizer companies, I tried to talk to them. They said, I don't want to tell the farmer he can cut his chemicals in half or his fertilizers in half. He said, how am I going to make a living? That is a problem.
Yeah, it's broken. That's where the break comes in, if you ask me. But now, if you would, can you talk a little bit about soil microbes as livestock? We talked about this a little bit. If the microbes are our livestock, what is the best ration we can feed them to ensure they are working for us?
Yes. So first you got to create that ideal home and take away some of the negatives, whether it be salts, ammonias, insecticides, fungicides. Even glyphosate is licensed as a fungicide. It's patented for several things out here. So I'm using Roundup or glyphosate out here. So now I got to take away some of those negatives, but then I got to create an ideal home and feed them. And that ideal home is they got to have air and they can't be waterlogged and they got to have a balance of food. Now, if I want to have I like to have some young succulent plants and some old mature plants. And composting is the advantage to composting is that you're digesting it before you put it back in the soil. So now it becomes more of exchange of nutrients and a house for bacteria and a bacterial stimulant. And then getting photosynthesis to really work out here. So I think we know enough about what it takes and what kind of feed we got to feed based on what kind of results we want to get in soil.
And it's exciting that you say that because that's exactly the way that we look at it as well. We track, so we test. We build soil structure. We make sure there's life there, which is, the biology is the life of the soil.
Yeah.
We give it energy, if there's some foods that need to be given to that biology, whatever it is, and then we track it again. And it's a system, and that's the easiest way I feel like, and that we found the biological, like what we call it is the biological beyond organic methodologies, right?
Yes.
That's the system to rebuild the soil. And you just confirmed it for us, and I'm happy that you did. What we're doing is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So that's the way we look at the livestock or the microbes as livestock. We got to track them. We got to give them structure, whether it's compost, we got to build that soil structure to give them a home, or you're just going to continuously be down the same path over and over and over. So,
and that's why I got our farm. The only inputs we have anymore, we add sulfur and boron. They always see I'm a dairy nutrient. I always test my feed. Sulfur used to come more from the air, and boron is our soils are so deficient on boron, and we get enough rain, and we got light soils. It's hard now putting boron with my compost really makes it more efficient. But boron and sulfur, the only two. I said to my son, "Do we need to keep putting on all this compost because we're doing all these cover crops?" And it's hard sometimes. It's not very big expense, but we sell our corn to an organic poultry farm and we get the manure back. And then we put our carbon sources with it and compost it and add the sulfur and boron. We're down to 1,000 pounds an acre on some land and a ton on some of the more marginal lands. So I don't think we're not willing to walk away from that because that's all biology food. And our farm is successful now. And would I have to do all that? That's a good question. But right now, the farm is pretty successful doing the minor things it does.
Explain how minerals unlock biology and how biology unlocks minerals. I think that's a two-way, the concept of really it's solubilizing nutrients. That's the concept of it.
Yes.
But how does that happen or how does it work?
So first of all, I look at the soil structure. See, I tell people, double your root system and cut your fertilizer and water in half. Now, how are you going to double a root system? Roots don't grow in concrete. And what stops roots from growing? Soluble nutrients and excess water. So the old statement years ago when I was a kid was, if you plant in dust, in fall your bins will bust because you're going to grow a bigger root system looking for nutrients. That's why dumping all kinds of soluble nutrients down there. Now we cut down our ability to tap into more. The other thing is like the new information that people like James White out there at Rutgers is talking about, that your plant is not a vegetarian. It's eating bacteria, and it's absorbing the bacteria through hair roots. Yeah. Now, if I get a big root system, I got to have enough air in the little hair roots, the little fine roots. The salt and ammonia just wipes them right out. And so now the plant is feeding that biology based on what it needs, just like the mycorrhizae and the fungus. It needs phosphorus, so it'll feed that stuff. And so it builds that symbiotic relationship with all this biology, but I got to have the ability to, within the soil structure and everything, to have that grow. And that's the other reason I mentioned earlier. That's why I kind of like strip tilling, because I'm at least making that ground's not concrete. I'm trying to expect that plant to perform in to get this ball rolling, to get it started.
Let's talk a little bit about practical application and equipment. So you have a nuanced view on tillage, which we've talked about a few times now. Unlike the strict no-till movement, talk to me about strategic tillage.
So first of all, on the tillage thing, just like we were taught years ago, the plow will destroy your soils. You can't use the disc. What destroys soils is working bare ground. So if I got all that massive cover crop growing out there in my disc, we use high-speed disc on these vertical tillage machines that we have out here to shallow incorporate. So if that blade is cutting through all kinds of residues, and there's all kinds of organic matter there, it won't destroy I can't get a hard pan or a soil destruction only working on bare ground. So then I always say tillage with a purpose or thoughtful disturbance of the land. And so I want to make sure I'm feeding my soil life. And that's why if I spray that stuff above ground, there's quite a few discussions taking place in acres about that. Yes, I gain some benefits from that, but that's above ground. That's just going to oxidize up. That's not going to get into my soil. And yes, I have to have some in there so I don't have a crust. But I want to make sure I got enough biomass in there. So my tillage is really for a purpose. First of all, we're organic, and the better the soil structure. If you don't realize that weeds and nitrogen, everybody fights in organic. Well, I can grow nitrogen. Now weeds, I can also reduce the amount of weeds in certain specific types by having a loose, crumbly ground. The wheat seeds are really small. They need soil seed contact. What if your soil was so loose loose and fluffy and you had all this residues in it, how are the weeds going to get a chance to grow? Our weed pressure keeps getting less and less and less on our organic farm the longer we're at this thing. So how deep? Someone's out. I said, we got time we get done, because we have our 1 year soil, but we grow rye after corn, and in the springtime we frost seed clover, a 3-way clover mix into it, and then we combine some rye. Last year it rained all the time and the clover got bigger than the rye. We didn't even get much to combine. Then we batwing more. So the first thing, if you go back to Louis Bromfield in the 1940s, Malabar Farms, when he first talked about building 6 inches of topsoil in 5 years, first thing you do is put a blanket on top of the ground. So all that straw and all that residue, we batwing more. So when I come to springtime, there's about 3-4 inches of residues. Now, some of that's being digested as time goes on. Then in the spring, when the clover is 6 to 8 inches tall, it's really high and succulent, something I'd feed to a cow to get a lot of milk out of her. If I put that back in the soil, that feeds bacteria. Now I got my surge of soluble nutrients to grow that crop. And so it's understanding how biology works and how to feed them to get this thing to work. And yes, I might do some destruction, maybe by tearing their house apart, but I'm not tearing a bare house apart. All the sticks and pieces are still laying there. They just got to put it all back together. The food is all there for them. Our farm does not have less worms, does not have less biology, because I once in a while disturb it. I think one of the common mistakes is that they're doing it for the government program, and all they got to, they plant as late as possible and spray as early as possible. That's kind of silly. They don't understand the value in it. Farmers do not understand how to make money doing it. And the other thing is, or they might put it out there and someone says, oh, they let it get too big. It gets away from them, like rye. I'm with a group called Rye Revival, and there's a group out there in Colorado. I think there's another one talking about rye. Rye is the plant that's here to save the planet, we keep saying, because it grows this massive root systems out here, but it can get away from you. In the springtime, you can't put rye in front of a grass. We put rye in front of our corn when it's 6 inches tall. Well, I tell people, you better take it down. It'll grow really fast and get away from it. Once it gets too complex, now the soil life's got to eat first, and you're starving your crop, and then you blame the cover crops when it's really your management. It's learning what you're trying to accomplish with that, and what minerals am I trying to extract. It's really interesting out there in Center, Colorado. There's a really good potato farmer out there. You probably know who I'm talking about. But anyway, he grew mustard as a biofumigant on potatoes, and he's in light sandy soil, and it accumulated unbelievable amount of sulfur. So there's a story about a plant. Not only did it bring up, because it's got a yellow flower, mustard, it brings up calcium, phosphorus, but it brought up a huge amount of sulfur. Well, now I got my sulfur in that carbon biological cycle, but you see, they got it, because they're growing potatoes, they can't leave it. They want to work that in the ground, because they can't have those residues laying in the soil when they grow their potatoes. So they're doing a destructive kind of a thing, but they're doing 1 year soil building and 1 year potatoes, and getting very successful about doing that. But understanding what plants would bring up minerals, and find minerals that you normally wouldn't. That's a light soil. You wouldn't expect to get that much sulfur out of a plant unless it's a special plant for a special reason. And then they got to make sure it's digested down by the time they plant the crop they want to make money on.
Yeah.
And then say, who am I trying to feed? What am I trying to accomplish with? What crop am I going to follow next? And I'm going to follow a crop like soybeans here in the Midwest. I don't mind my cover crop getting bigger, because I want to starve the soil of nitrogen, so then the soybean will put more nodules and produce more of its own nitrogen. But now if it's a grass crop, wheat or corn or something, oh my gosh, I cannot do complex carbon. I got to do highly soluble. It needs a lot of soluble nutrients, those crops do. So then I better not let those cover crops get that big.
Gotcha. Don't get to that woody, that really tough material to break down, because then what are you feeding? You're feeding the fungi, right? You're not feeding the bacteria.
Yeah. I can only live for a short period of time. They got that 5-to-1 nitrogen to carbon ratio. And so then after they die, the fungus and the other animals eat them. Well, then if we get a burst of nitrogen, where's the nitrogen coming from? Well, there's 79% of it above the ground. Besides that, we grew can accumulate highly nitrogen levels, but we also can feed organisms that can pull more nitrogen out of the air.
Perfect. Well, let's discuss a little bit your approach on soil testing. And you mentioned it again, like we've talked about some of these things, but why is a standard soil test often just insufficient for a biological farmer? And what should we be looking for?
Because, a regular soil test, like I said, I really rely on that soil test. So I said, for the reasons I know what kind of soil it is, and I want to know where some of these minerals are at. But it doesn't tell me if those minerals are plant exchangeable. It doesn't tell me if my soil is hard and tight or compacted. It doesn't tell me anything about what the biology is. So people try to make these things into a religion. So I want that base test. But see, the soil test is your project. Your tissue or plant testing, your plant health is your report card. How well did you get those minerals exchanged? And there's where that biological link comes in. So I want to monitor plants. It's amazing. Now, I can say I'm a dairy guy, so I used to spend $40,000 a year on my customers doing feed testing. We used to test our hay after each cutting. We could measure the minerals, so I knew what kind of mineral levels made cows really perform. That's why I said we talk about nutrient density. I want to get my calcium in the feed really high, my phosphorus really high, magnesium really high, and boron really high. It'll be the best, highest quality crop you'll ever feed an animal. So we kept monitoring that. And now that was at the stage when we were making forages or making hay. See, now if I can do sap tests measuring what's happening every day. And boy, you better do a lot of testing for a long period of time. It's got its limitations because what if it's a drought? What if it rains? There's a lot of limitations that varies a lot. Where a tissue test and a plant forage test, I think, is absolutely essential. I don't mind doing the sap tests and some of those things, was telling what's going on today, but boy, you can get down a lot of rabbit holes with those things that don't tell you the whole picture. But I do want to monitor my plant. The soil testing and the plant testing. Now, I have not had much success on soil health tests because I take a test so I can make a management decision. If I'm measuring soil health, it's nice to have a nice soil health report card and put it on the wall and frame it, but how am I going to manage if it's not there? Doesn't give me guidance on how to change things. And so a regular soil test and monitoring my plant and recognizing what minerals are not necessarily being taken up and recognizing what's necessary. I always say, you don't need to test your sick, unhealthy crop. Test your really good crop and find out why what's in there that's making that perform. And also look down in your soil to see if I got a double root system on these things. So it's a lot more complex than just a soil test by itself. It's one piece of a big puzzle.
Who do you use for your soil testing?
We use Midwest Labs out of Omaha. I was with Brookside for years. Any A&L lab, all of those are offshoots of the Allbrick. And Allbrick is one of those things that I was a Brookside consultant, and I had a lot of respect for what I got taught. And everybody attacked for Allbrick. He was trying to make a perfect soil test. They totally misunderstood that. Every soil test does exactly the same thing with different. They're not measuring what's in the soil. They're extracting what they assume the crop can get. So what happens is every soil left has the same opinion. We need a certain sufficiency level of those minerals in the soil. And if you did that, take a soil test, wherever you send it, whatever they say a short ad to get up that sufficiency level, you would have balanced the soil exactly like Allbrick said. Now, the only thing that most labs ignore is the excess. And the other thing is they get so hung up on the pH. See, if your pH is 8 and you're going to spend a lot of your money to try to lower that pH, what a waste of time. Why don't you get your minerals in the carbon biological cycle and then the pH isn't important? Dumping minerals on a high pH soil just ties them up. So put some humates with them. See, if your pH is low and you put lime on there, you end up getting the carbonate neutralizes the acidity and you get available calcium. I like to use a soluble calcium source and spoon feed a little bit of it, see? And so I don't want to depend. There's all kinds of things to be learned about the soils out here and how to get minerals exchangeable in those into the plants. That's why I got to monitor the plant. I can't just monitor the soil. I got to monitor the plant also over time.
You look at the rhizosphere and people do freak out about pH, and it will tie up some things in soils, right? But in the rhizosphere, that's really where the pH changes. And it might be different than what your overall soil is, but that plant is basically excreting the proper acids and things like that exudates out in order to provide the proper food for the biology that it needs to uptake what it needs. As long as that nutrition is there, right? As long as that's there and it's not a limited piece of the puzzle, you're going to be okay. It's going to uptake it no matter what the pH is, correct?
And that's why the pH, if it's too low, you're going to get too much iron and aluminum possibly. When it's too high, see, the minerals don't exchange well because maybe some of the biology doesn't function. But then to grow and get those minerals in that carbon crop out here, we went on a field years ago. It was a sandy soil. We laid out a 10 by 10 area and every week took a water-soluble soil test. pH went from 7 to 5.5 in one growing season. Like you said, around that little root rhizosphere, it puts hydrogen in when it takes a nutrient back. I was in Arizona and I was on an alfalfa field and it was 12 or 14% sodium. And I said, alfalfa doesn't grow in a 14% sodium soil, but the alfalfa was beautiful. So I went back. There was a researcher at the University of Wisconsin I got to know really well, Philip Barak, and he's kind of retiring now, but he did a lot of work on humates from the other parts of the world. I went to him and he said, you take a soil sample, they send it to the lab and they grind it and they homogenize it. Your soils, he said there was probably spots in that soil where there were 30% sodium. The alfalfa root just didn't go to those. And like you said, around that rhizosphere, around those roots, and that's the reason why I want to leave middle zone alone. That's the most fertile spot on your farm, and next around an earthworm channel, because that's a different pH. It's a different world out here. It's a better nutrient exchange. It's a higher level of fertility, and that's why you can't tear the whole thing back up. You're starting over all the time.
Talk a little bit about Otter Creek Farm in the future. Your son's farming it now, and what we're hoping for is I don't have a farm ourselves here. And I want to put also the same thing that you said at the beginning of this. My money where my mouth is. So we're working on trying to get something where we can have a test farm or a demonstration farm to do so, to prove what we're doing, and even in the soils we have.
Yeah, and it was a conventional farm, and we started out dairy farming and we were organic, and we grew a lot of really good forages. I had my handle on how to grow a good quality forage, and we went organic right away. My son was 100% debt financed. We couldn't take the fluctuations in conventional prices, and we got really good at organic, and so then we got, it was hard getting help, and we got kind of burned out with all the cows are a huge undertaking, and so then we're now cash croppers, but we had already built those soils with livestock and got our mineral balances in place. And that's why we have the 1-year soil building and 1-year crops. And I tell you, any vegetable producer, anybody that's got gardens or things, have twice as much land as what you're going to grow your crops on, and give it a year rest, give it some chance to grow. So most people can't understand. They say, oh, your land must be cheap. You must not pay much rent. Why could you have land lay idle? I share my economics. Our goal on an organic farm here in the Midwest, my son's goal is to net $500 an acre, and he farms 1,500 acres. That's not pocket change. And we farm every other year, basically. So he can farm 1,500 acres all by himself in a 45-mile circle, because corn and cover crops don't compete with one another. So he gives it an 18-month rest, take our cover crops down in the spring. Control got easier. We don't have to put all these nutrients on. We stick nothing in the ground but seeds. So we come up with a system that works really well for us in our world in this part. And it fits. It's hard to get farmers to do that. And they say, I got to pay rent. So I said, well, we got to pay rent too. I said, but it's looking at the whole system. That's hard for farmers to get to do that. And that is really a part of the struggle. Now, the other thing is about farming is that's really changed out here. On the larger scale farmers, see, now we got global positioning. They can monitor from the sky of what they're doing. They got yield monitors. They can take infrared pictures of their land. They can measure mineralization of their land from the air. So now every farm can do its own research. Because I would say, if I read research from Colorado, does that really fit my farm? Even the University of Wisconsin's black, rich prairie soils. We farm sandy loams, but I can test my own farm. And now these guys, even at a larger scale, I said, everyone wants to kind of prove it. I said, well, that's the fun in farming, is going to the next level, but having different things out here, putting on different rates out here and testing things out. Does that really fit my farm? Before you risk a lot of money to do this, do it to yourself. Do a 3-year study out here if you're worried about making some changes to see what they do for you.
Once you get that engine going, you don't necessarily, you just start flipping that belt to the next one and the next one, next farm. And the next thing you know, your workload goes way down, your profits go way up, and everything that a farm should be is back to it. And that's what's going to get, I feel like, generations of farmers, the young kids, excited about staying on a farm and wanting to do it, is like what you're talking about on your farm, Gary. Your son, what he's doing, he's farming 1,500 acres by himself, but he's profitable. It's fun to do it, and you don't have to stress out year over year. Am I going to make enough money this year to pay for the tractors and pay for the barn and pay for all these things, and that's the exciting part. And that's what I believe that's what farming should be.
So why did we chase our kids off the farm? Because farmers became a slave to agribusiness. And that's why they complain about being gouged. You can see, why would the kids stay? The parents are struggling. They're complaining. They don't like the direction things are going. They're not getting paid enough. Well, if I was a kid, I'd leave too. Now, I was going to be a veterinarian, so I left my dad's dairy farm also. But then I got back in. Not that I didn't like farming. It's just that I was a lot of interest in getting more education, and I'm glad I did. It was really good for me to open my mind up to more things and more possibilities.
Yeah, but it's true. Why would they want to stay when their grandpa struggled, their parents struggled? Some years are good, some years are bad, and they're there continuously working the longest hours you ever have, which I'm not saying you won't by owning a farm. You work hours. But the reality is the payoff. That's what you got to look at. And they make it exciting for this younger generation to come in and really want to farm and take over the family farms. That's what I
I do too. In the farming, it's so, we really, like now come spring, oh my gosh, we'll be going crazy, getting the cover crops taken down, getting things planted. But that ends in about 6 weeks. The weed control is done, and then we got to harvest our rye. So it's everything seasonal. I would not want to have to go to a job and do the same thing every day, 365 days out of the year. It would drive me absolutely nuts. And farming is a challenge. You become your own boss kind of, but you're the one the cards are in your lap. You have the ability to make it fun and make it profitable, and no one's going to do that for you.
In your book, Advancing Biological Farming, which I have right here, you move into more complex territory, right? In this versus the first book that you wrote. What is the one thing you have changed your mind about, would you say, in the last 10 years?
So I think some of the things this thing I didn't necessarily understand. I was always about mineral balance and things. In fact, that the biological farmer, the one that I wrote first, is now a revised edition, and there's a lot of chemistry in that. Advancing biological farming is just a really good kind of a base. What I now change is how nutrients are exchanged. This thing about years ago, we thought we have a certain sufficiency level in our soil before the minerals are either come through biotics, through biology, or abiotics through chemistry. And so I have that better understanding. I have a better understanding of how to balance the biology in my soil and what it really makes it to get it work and how to build that resilience. I did a field days a couple of years ago. You always got to go dig up your neighbor's plants to compare to your farm and stuff. After the field days, I had the roots laying out there. I came back 4 or 5 days later. Our soils were still moist and holding the moisture, and the neighbor's soils are dried out to be a brick. That's called resilience.
Yes.
We actually like to be a little drier. It's easier farming, and we don't need all that rain that we thought we used to need out here. And so things that go on over time, I said, I'm always learning stuff new. And I think that part of it, even like how plants and roots and systems work. Now, I think the information from 100 years ago, there was a lot of really smart people. But I like reading antique books, maybe because I'm an antique myself. I don't know. But, and there's a lot of knowledge back there. But just see how much better understanding we have today. I always say, I got myself in a little bit of trouble at some of these university meetings when I said, we got it all figured out. In my lifetime, we figured it out. We understand the minerals. We know there's more than NPK. We know there's different sources. We know there's ratios. We know we need to get them exchangeable. We understand the biology. They need to have a great home. We need to feed them. We have to have a diversity of the diet, and we got to watch the digestibility of that diet. And we understand tillage. It's not about no-till or plowing. It's about tillage for a purpose, and that shallow incorporating and get rid of that crust on the ground and feed your soil biology and make sure the water soaks into it. We understand it all. We don't have to redo that anymore. Now where do we go?
That's right.
And that's once you get that basis, and we understand the basis.
Yep. So now it's just being able to get these conventional farmers, these big, large scale, or not even large scale, but conventional guys to understand, boy, you know what? Let's figure out how to implement this on the farm, move away from all of the loans, move away from all of the inputs, move away from all of the, your idea of just yield versus return on investment per acre. Get them to figure that out. And I feel like that's maybe what this next 10 years of time or 20 years or who knows how long it's going to take. But I feel like this is what the next step is. You're right. We do know all of those things. And that's the exciting part. You've proven it. In your lifetime, you've proven it. And you're like, yep, it works. And so now how do we get the masses to switch over and be like, I'm done. I'm not spending money and I'm going to be profitable and grow good nutrient dense food, right?
And that's why I think that some of the things I look forward to coming is the fact that when we can actually test a crop someone grows and lay out, this is the nutrient density of it, how rich in nutrients. When that comes about, when that's real and we can really trust it, and all you got to do is, it's not just a chemistry, it's not just running a test in a lab, it's how it performs and how people's health, it's all those secondary metabolites and all those things that are in plants that we have not been able to measure that are really essential to have healthy people.
Yes.
So once we get to that level, that's going to really make it, the ones that are doing the job need to be rewarded for doing a better job.
Well, and that's what we've always said, even, and it's so funny you say that because we have ideas out there and we're working on some things, but the reality is producers, once they grow nutrient dense food, they need to be paid for that. Yes. Right. And so the guys, it's going to force people. And we've had this conversation with a few people. It is going to force producers or farmers to want to change the way they farm, or they're not going to have their produce or whatever they're growing purchased, because it's going to have less nutrient density. If we can get to that point, I feel like that might be even the bigger shift, is because then a farmer is going to be, or a producer is going to be like, well, I better grow the most nutrient dense, not the highest yield, but I better have the best food or the best, feed or whatever that is available, because that's what's going to be, you're going to be paid on, and they need to be paid on that.
And that is an interesting kind of a thing. That's why I said organic in itself is, you can be just, I'd be certified organic, but I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't do that, so I must be organic. So we buy only organic food. I spend a lot of time on my health. I'm in my 80s, and I got a lot of energy and I feel really good and I like keeping it that way. But I know a lot of farmers that we select to buy from right now. I just know how they farm. I know too many people out here maybe, but I go to the co-op here, the organic co-op, and buy food out here. But at least I'm buying cleanness. I'm not loading my body with something that I have to try to get rid of that's going to interfere with me. So I trust the fact that the organic food is clean air, clean water, clean food, but is it nutrient rich? That's the level we got to get to.
That's right. I think that is the next 10 years, 20, whatever it might be. I think that's the next level. So what's the first step a conventional farmer, and this is where we get into it, and we've kind of talked about this. What's the next step a conventional farmer should take to begin the biological transition without risking their bottom line, what's that first step they should take?
Yeah, and I think that my first step would be I would question my nutrients I'm putting on. We got to either buffer out my fertilizer or reduce the amount of. I can't just keep putting on high levels of soluble NP and K. I'm not going to go anywhere. I got to either buffer those out by putting humates with them, get them into compost, or choosing better sources. And then I also got to then say, look, what am I doing? It's not about no-till. It's about learn how to manage some kind of a cover crop. Have something green growing and photosynthesizing all the time on my land. I did a meetings across Minnesota with NRCS, and they were talking about cover crops out here. And I went to a farmer that was a retired dairy farmer. All he did was plant rye after corn and after beans. But he came up with a system, shortened his day length on his corn, and he showed his soils and all that. But he reduced his inputs greatly, and he dropped his insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, and he got rid of his biotechnology by growing one cover crop called rye. Now, it wasn't a complete cocktail mix or anything else. Now, he had been a dairy farmer. His mineral levels were pretty good to start with, but so I think we need to have living plants in the soil. We need to evaluate what we're putting on that land and realize that there's negative effects to all those and learn how to get rid of your trade dollars. See, a lot of farmers out here, even mentioned Mark Shepard, he's been a friend of mine for 30 years out here. He started out, he didn't have a lot of money to fix those soils. And so therefore it had to come over time. But, start with your calcium, get your soluble calcium levels up, start making sure your calcium and phosphorus is delivered out here. And grow some kind of cover crop out here and then try to get rid of some of your negatives.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that he's even said that Mark mentioned as well is like, man, you know what? You're better off to not put anything out and have, zero expense than you are to just continuously dump more and more money into something, and then lose money every year. I mean, that's a huge gain. So, and like what you just said, you have to really ask yourself, why am I putting all this out? Is it help? Is it an investment for the future? Like, is it going to help me next year and the next year and the next year? Or is it simply just, I'm going to put this one input in this year and then again, next year I have to do it and again, next year and over and over. So like really question those things. So I like that take on that, Gary.
Yeah. And just like I said, the farmers out there, they haven't been buying enough phosphorus and potash. And those are really expensive. Hard times make good farmers, by the way.
Yeah.
So right now they're going to, so if you're going to be regenerative and tap what's in the soil, you better have a reserve to tap it. At least they got their P's and K's. They dumped enough of that on for the last 40 years. Now, less calcium and those other things are a lot cheaper to do in here, and putting on that cover crop is not really that expensive. They learn how to manage it and how to take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Got to go through.
So the modern ag industry is currently, I would say, in a carbon gold rush, right? With massive focus on sequestration and carbon credits. You've been vocal that many claims of massive organic matter increases are simply the result of bad test results. Okay. And the soil sequestration, it's finite. So here's the question for you. Are we setting up farmers for a massive carbon bubble by focusing on sequestration or locking it away rather than the carbon cycle, digesting it?
Yeah. And I think there's that is an issue. That's why I say taking carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the number one limiting factor on crops. The stomata on the bottom of the leaf, a soil ought to be well aerated, and the aerobic organisms are breathing, and they need to release carbon dioxide for our plant. Sugars is what it produces. It needs carbon dioxide. So why are we trying to get rid of it? Why don't we learn how to capture it? And that's what drive our yields, and it more so than a lot of the other things they do. And so that's why I always thought if you go into a Midwestern cornfield in the middle of the summer, the carbon dioxide meter is going to read almost zero. The line is sealed over. It's compacted. It's tight. The crop is not getting. That's why the quality is not there, and there's issues with building sugars in that plant. Yeah, I don't want to stick the carbon away. I want to manage that carbon and get it into my plants. I want to capture that carbon dioxide, not just bump it up into the atmosphere. And so, there's things we're a big country, and there's a lot of fuels and things burned. We're dumping a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, but I don't want to use the earth as a sink to try to bury it. Future generations, they're going to say, boy, that was a dumb idea.
Yeah.
Let's put it into plants. Let's get plants out there. Suck it up with plants.
They will do it, 100%. So, and then once a farmer reaches their soil's carrying capacity, does their incentive to farm biologically disappear under the current carbon credit model, would you say?
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know if there's a disincentive to it. I think the fact that once a farmer gets to that tipping point, and in the beginning, they're like a little seedling, they need nurturing and they need watching, and you got to start with knowledge, and they got to start with some places out here, like I said, with calcium, sulfur, and boron, and wherever they start with on their soils. But see, I guess our farming system, I believe we're sequestering a lot of carbons, and we're building a lot of organic matter in our soils and all these kind of things. But I don't really need a government check to do this. I can make my money on farming. will the government interfere with what really makes farms work? And that's always a concern.
I would say 100%. There's a lot of producers we work with that don't necessarily like to take or participate in programs for that reason. They
That's
just want to
right.
be good producers. They want to be good farmers, take care of their soils. They know what they need to do, and they don't need, like you said, programs to give them stipends or anything like that. They're going to do it because they know what's right and what's wrong and why they're doing it.
And then the system will work and they don't need that.
That's right. You become very profitable per acre. Like you said, $500 net per acre. Hey, that's profitable.
That's
Why do you need stipends or assistance when you're doing
that.
this? Next thing, the economic cliff, investing in soil versus paying the bills. And I think this is more so for conventional guys, right? One of your most radical transition strategies is for farmers not to harvest a crop during their 36-month, that transition to organic period, right? Where you're going from strictly conventional over to organic. You want to really just focus on building soil health, growing cover crops, things like that. You really want to see them grow, plow down soil building cover crops to ensure that bumper crop in year 4. So
Yeah.
right now in this era with high interest rates or higher interest rates, they're starting to come down, but they're not all the way there yet, right? Or what
No.
we've seen in the past. Tight margins. How do you justify the economic sacrifice of losing 2 years of income or of that income? And is that a viable strategy an average family farm can take, Gary?
Yeah, and I think there's certain things they can do is to try to grow crops like we would say here in the Midwest. If I got to have some kind of income, well, soybeans are pretty low input kind of a crop, and save your corn, which requires a lot of chemistry and stuff. And so, see, and just start on whatever acres you're comfortable with in the beginning. And like for us, see, when we started whole hog in the beginning, but we were a dairy farm, and so we went through that. We had a milk check, although it wasn't an organic milk check while we were transitioning. And I know right now the organic milk checks are really high, but so then for us, once we got to a certain level, we took on new land. We just spent the 2 years building it. And I just did a couple of years ago. We just did another 100 acres, and we spent $100,000 getting the land fixed and getting it transitioned to organic. Everybody said, "Oh my gosh!" But see, out of 1,500 acres, that was just 100. So at some point, you can get to a level that you can take on new land, or you can all of a sudden fix the rest of it. So in the meanwhile, I see a lot of guys say, "Oh, we'll just grow hay. We'll grow hay, and then during the transition to sell hay." Well, first of all, hay doesn't have a very good market right now in the Midwest, and the other thing is hay takes a lot of minerals and organic matter off your farm. I hate growing hay. I want to sell things that walk off my farm or grain. There's not much minerals in grain. I don't want to sell my forages. And so that's a hard transition. That's you got access to a lot of manure or something to replace it. So growing hay doesn't necessarily build your soils. You're taking a lot of organic matter and minerals off those soils. And so I'd rather find here we'd grow soybeans. There's some crops that are really high nutrient demanding and high chemical demanding. I'd delay that until my land is organic, and I'd make sure my last year I grew a beautiful cover crop so I could grow my most profitable crop that first year. And for us, that's corn. So I got a beautiful clover legume crop. And so my first year of organic farming, I'm growing the thing that returns me the most.
No, that's perfect. Yeah. So you really need to think about that. And then, like you said, start with what you're comfortable or what you can do.
Yes.
If it's a 20-acre plot, whatever that looks like, start with it, but you have to start somewhere. And then just
Yeah.
start taking that money and saying, okay, we did this now. Now we're able to afford to do the next one and the next one and build that as time goes.
And you as well know, too, there's a lot of mentors out here. Like a lot of farmers are not, some groups of farmers don't want to share their information. A lot of farmers are willing to share. Go find someone in your neighborhood that is doing it. And I'm sure they're willing to talk about it. You don't have to hide in the woods and do everything yourself. Go to people in your community that are doing this thing and doing it fairly successfully, and follow some of their advice and their ideas. Most farmers are really willing to share that. So here in the Midwest, there's a lot of us that are really quite successful at it. Wisconsin's got a lot of organic farms. Of course, a lot of them are livestock farms. And there's a handful of people doing what I do. And there's a whole bunch of vegetable farmers all the way from out west all the way to work with some in Oregon and some in Virginia that are really following this soil building and 1 year crop, higher return crops. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Commodity crops, it's quite different. It was kind of interesting the other day. I was at a meeting and I really stuck with me. I always say these aha moments. I'm working on another book about what tripped my mind to start looking at things differently. And this one hero said years ago it was organic against conventional. Now it's commodity against community. So I think these community things, you think about that and say, a lot of farmers are commodity farmers, but community, I think the local folks, if they're going to start buying more stuff grown in their community, and they can identify what farms are grown by. So we're not It's impossible to take on 1,500 acres like my son did. We bought land for $1,000 an acre. Now it's $15,000 an acre, and tractors are $300,000. Who's going to start this thing? We can do community farming. A nice way to look at things too, to say, well, can I start? Am I willing to work with people in the community? Can I start to do things in the community?
I like it, and just get it going somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, even with this podcast, and what we're doing is bringing everybody in as a community. And it's funny, it's a large community, right? It's different,
Yeah.
but it's the idea is, as long as we can bring in enough people and really push it out to the world of why it's so important, everybody in the whole, our whole nation can watch this, can see it, and realize, like, I have people that are competitors on here of our company. Well, why would I do that? We're not competitors. It's a community.
Yeah.
And if we're all fighting for the same thing, the reality is it's what it's going to take to really take off.
Yeah.
And it's the same principle that you're talking about.
Yes, everybody always told me that I never kept any secrets. I shared everything with everybody. I said, well, first of all, the best secret you could usually put on a billboard going through town, and the religions have proven that, and most people don't notice it anyway. So I never had a secret. Why wouldn't I share everything? Why wouldn't I want more people to get in the game?
Yeah. I got some rapid fire questions for you. What's your favorite biological tool?
My favorite biological tool is probably my carbon-based fertilizer end of it, and cover crops are my favorite biological tool. If I got to have the ground protected.
Perfect. One book every farmer should read beside your own. Of course, they should read these ones. That's the important ones. Those are the first ones. But then after that, what's the next one?
I thought about that. It's just a while. See, Don Schrieffer was a really good friend of mine. He's passed away in the 90s. He wrote From the Soil Up and Agriculture in Transition. He was the guy that got into strip till. He was 30 years ahead of his time on concepts out here. And if you'd like to read some old books that are really good, go to the Malabar Farms, Louis Bromfield books, I find kind of fun. And Acres has a new one out. Some young lady redid, refreshed some of it. One of the books I really like on biology is Michael Phillips. Now, he's passed away also. So he wrote a book about mycorrhizae. But it's not just about mycorrhizae. I really liked his book. Now, I'm sure there's other ones out here, but his book, I tell people, if you want to really get a better understanding of your biology, read Michael's book out here on mycorrhizae. And then, so I'm sure there's other books out there, but those are the ones that I kind of always, I like.
That's really cool. Michael Phillips, we actually worked with Michael, for a bit, and, on some biological preparations that he would make for his apple orchard.
Oh, he did.
And it was really cool. And then when I heard that he passed away, or, they found out, it was a really sad thing. But, he died doing what he loved.
Yes.
And so that's the thing, is at the end of the day, it's interesting you bring that up. All right. The biggest myth in modern agriculture.
The biggest myth is that diseases and insects are just there everywhere, and we have to spray for them. So that's a real myth. And then we need a certain level. We have to put on what we take off. We only choose two things to do that with, P and K. Those are really myths that are out here. And the fact that they just got hung up on this chemistry thing out here. They don't realize all the potentials of it. And so some of the really weird things are, the pesticides, fungicides, biotechnology, pesticides. They don't realize what that's costing them, not only in dollars, but what damage it's doing to their farms. But they really think that, you mean the plant will be healthy if I don't spray it? That's impossible. There must be bugs out there eating it up. And that's not true. And that's a myth out here. And then the other thing, there's myth about the fact that Ulbricht's system of balancing minerals was not real. And there's a lot of evidence about ratios and of all those things, and there's more minerals involved. So I think that they got to get beyond some of those things. That's why, the first step for a lot of people is education. Go to some meetings, go to the Acres Conference, attend some of the events that are going on out here, and just listen to people for a while. And I think, all of a sudden, it's kind of fun to go to those events when the energy is really high and people aren't bitching about prices when you go to a really good conference.
That's right, because they're getting good information and it's priceless. Yeah. And I know that you even speak like at the Eco Ag conference, you speak at some of these, and it's important, very important. And what you share is, like you said, it's priceless. Can't really put a number on it because it's the future, and that's something you can't do. So if you don't mind, a couple of places that, our audience can find you.
I'm working with different projects all over, and through Acres USA, if you look at some of my information there, and I've been with them, I've been attending every conference for the last 40 years. I'm the longest standing attendee, and of course, I've spoke at it for the last 30 years in a row. But I said, Zimmer Ag, my daughter and I, it's just hard for me to do on-farm consulting because I got so much going on, and I do a lot of meetings and a lot of traveling and those kind of things. But I'll gladly help anybody I can in any ways I really can. Probably the best way to get a hold of me, Zimmer Ag would be one. My daughter and I much direct on-farm consulting. I said I can give advice the best I can, but for me to constantly show up at all these farms all over is hard for me to do. I think we learn through stories and people telling their stories or sharing their farm stories. And that's why I like some of the things that deal with stories out here. Because as humans, just factual information isn't an easy way to learn.
No.
Just look and living someone else's story.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, no, we appreciate that. But yeah, if you would pick up Gary's books, it's important. And then at the end of the day, I just want to thank you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your time with our audience. We're going to do everything we can to get this pushed out as far as we can. If our audience would please, like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, our social handles, follow Rocky Mountain BioAg, what we're doing. We're doing everything we can to do exactly what Gary's been doing for years and years and years. And we want to just continue to carry that banner on and not allow it to stop because it's the most important thing. So if you guys would please, like I said, subscribe to us, like us, follow us. And then not only that, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you guys would please like those channels as well. This podcast is going to go out on all those and we're going to do everything we can, like I said, to get it pushed out. So again, Gary, thank you so much for being with us today, for taking your time.
Yeah, and I'm honored by having you and others like doing what you're doing to carry the ball. In the beginning, I seemed like I was a lone ranger out. It's really nice to see a lot of other people. And the modern day thing, I'm an antique in terms of technology and all that. But see, I got to have someone else. That is a real, another game changer in the future that you guys, your generation can do.
It is. And you know what? And then we're here to help anytime we can. If we have to hop on another one of these, which I hope to have you on again, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure it happens, buddy. All right. So thank you again, Gary. We appreciate it. You have a great day. And we look forward to another conversation with you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.